Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us here on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Joy Lim Nakran. Just wanted to hop on here because we have a very special segment happening today because we're discussing the fate of former Clayton County Sheriff Victor Hill. As we reported to you yesterday, he was convicted and sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 6 years of supervised release for violating the civil rights of 6 detainees at the Clayton County Jail by ordering them to be strapped into restraint chairs for hours on end. As you can see in this video, it's kind of that we've been able to gather here on Atlanta News First Plus. You may recall also that his attorney told our cameras that they are planning to appeal. Let's listen.
It was important to note that the judge took into consideration all of the things that Victor Hill did for the community, and more specifically at the Clayton County Jail. The judge coming down to 18 months and the things that she said was a clear recognition of the uniqueness of this case.
All right, so joining me now to discuss, we have attorney Erica Wilson. And Erica, I know you've got an extensive background in criminal law, apart from several other practice areas. What are your initial thoughts about this conviction and sentencing?
I'm not surprised by the sentencing. I'm not surprised by the conviction. I've seen the tapes, haven't had opportunity to look at the indictment, but I am not surprised given what he has done. I saw the tapes. It didn't appear that it was justified for the restraint. And so I think the charges are definitely warranted. I'm not surprised by the sentence, and I'm not surprised by the appeal.
So, of course, the attorney's now talking about the possibility of appeal. To be clear, we were just discussing off camera. They can appeal the conviction. They can also appeal the sentence. Do you anticipate they're going to do both?
Well, so how it works in federal court is typically you have 10 days after the sentencing before you can file an appeal, even for the judgment in and of itself. So the judgment and the sentencing would be one and the same. The difference would be is if he took a plea and then he wanted to appeal his sentencing, those would be two separate issues. But they have 10 days after the day that he was sentenced to file the appeal. It's not uncommon that they do appeal. Typically, as criminal defense attorneys, that's the first thing we do, and we're not happy with the judgment, is we do go ahead and file that appeal. But I don't anticipate that it's going to be successful. Appeal rates are definitely not that high in regular court, but certainly for federal convictions, I mean, they're operating at a less than a 6% chance, and I just don't think that there's enough there to sustain an appeal.
So that said, obviously the attorney's job is to try. He's got to try to represent his client to the best of his ability, and he's got to file that appeal. If you are in his position as the criminal defense attorney, what's your best argument for trying to get an appeal?
So your best argument would be to pick apart the case in terms of what the evidence was presented. And I've listened to some of the sound bites from some of the other attorneys and what they're grasping at. They haven't stated any legal grounds that I've heard that they plan to appeal it on, but typically you appeal the verdict in and of itself, and you make the argument that the verdict was against a great weight of evidence in favor of Victor Hill. And so that would be the best arguments that they would have to make, is just to pick apart the evidence and what was presented.
Yeah. Any other issues that you think should be considered as they are moving forward with this case? For instance, we're talking about not just the 18 months, but the 6 years of supervised release following that. Is that reasonable?
I think it's very reasonable. I know it's a lot of shock and awe, the amount of time for supervised release for 6 years, but given the alternative, I don't know that they would want to go in the other route, because certainly as an attorney we would advocate for more of the supervised release and less of the actual incarceration. And so that may be a possibility, because typically, sometimes, not all the time, with appeals, the state or the federal government can come back and they can kind of negotiate and say, hey, if you don't appeal, maybe we can take this sentence over the other. And I think the option would be better suited to go with the more time for the supervised release other than the incarceration.
That's interesting. In terms of how the kind of trial went and so forth, or just how the conviction came about, what did you think of that process? Was there anything that surprised you?
There were no surprises. I mean, typically with federal cases, the federal government works backwards, right? Typically, what we understand with criminal cases is they make an arrest and then they do their investigation. With federal cases, it's the exact opposite, which is why they have such a high success rate, because they do the investigation first, they build their case, and then once they feel strong in their case, then they make the arrest. So that is why it's very hard to appeal those cases, because it is so airtight in terms of their preparation in advance. So I'm not surprised at all. This is not atypical. Specifically just because it's a sheriff that we're dealing with here. The feds, they have a very strategic way of handling these particular cases, and I think that they did a very good job.
He obviously is a public figure, still a very public figure, even after being removed from office. But do you think that has anything to do with how this all played out, how he was sentenced?
I don't think it necessarily had anything to do with how he was sentenced, but certainly in terms of how it played out. He was a very popular figure prior to all of this, and if you remember, he had some scandal prior to, and he was still elected back into that position. So he's certainly a people's favorite, and I think certainly when you have these type of situations, when the public puts so much trust into someone like this, particularly someone in law enforcement, I think it is very important that the public is very situationally aware of kind of what is occurring. And so I do think that his popularity in the community probably did play a significant role in making sure that these issues were brought to the forefront.
And do you think that it also presented a challenge in terms of prosecuting this case because of the influence and the power that he has?
Well, certainly whenever you're dealing with the public who serve as jurors, that's always going to be an issue that you may want to have to go through. But again, there's a process called voir dire, and that is where we, as the attorneys, kind of vet out the jurors prior to sitting on to see if there are any biases and utilizing any preemptory strikes that we would have to get any jurors that we think that may have some sort of favoritism towards him on the juror. But again, we have all the confidences in the world and the jurors that they will do the right thing for the community, and in this set of facts, they did.
Yeah, so I'm just want to show this video again to our viewers, because the indictment alleged that Hill, without any legal justification, was ordering his employees to strap detainees into restraint chairs, keep them there for hours in violation of their constitutional rights. Erica, I mean, you've been practicing law for many years now, including criminal law. How common do you think this practice is? I mean, hopefully it's not, but how common do you think this practice is?
And so these are the tales that we hear from many of our clients, and some of the disproportionate treatment that they receive being in jail. I don't think that I've heard something as egregious as this, as being strapped into this chair. We all have a liberty interest in our freedom, and it can't be taken away unjustifiably. And given some of the circumstances behind him with this chair, it didn't appear that there's a lot of justification for restraining someone in these chairs in the manner in which he did.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that it was actually dubbed Georgia's toughest paramilitary jail. And, I'm just wondering also just your thoughts systemically on kind of treatment of detainees, because, of course, there are certain people who advocate being tough on crime and accused criminals, but people who are accused are not guilty. I guess as viewers think about this issue, and of course they're worried about their own public safety, they want people to be held accountable, but just kind of lay out, if you will, why it's so important to protect these civil rights and how that should be done.
Well, it's important that they followed up on, because a lot of times and oftentimes, you have inmates and defendants who make these particular outcries. Some of them carry merit, some of them don't. But in these situations, fortunately for those involved, they were recorded, so it kind of did shed some light on some of the things that happen behind the scenes in these jails. But it is, like I said before, it's not uncommon. You oftentimes hear a lot of inmates complain about the treatment that they receive, and then, sometimes it doesn't carry a lot of merit, and sometimes it does. And certainly in this set of facts, this was one of those times where definitely some intervention was needed in order to ensure that those who are incarcerated aren't treated to any, disproportionate treatment while they're there.
Yeah, and as we watch this case going forward, what else do you think that it's important to keep in mind?
Well, just keep in mind that, as far as we are concerned, he has been convicted. He is now a convicted, criminal in terms of what he has done. We have to kind of just let the wheels of justice continue to play out. In terms of the appeal, appeals are standard. They're, boilerplate sometimes that we file them on behalf of our clients. And again, don't be, upset or just concerned about the appeal, but in terms of the success rate, you're looking at a very low success rate for appeals.
Okay. Yeah. Any final thoughts before we let you go here?
Yeah, no, I think they've done a great job, making sure that the citizens in Clayton County are protected. This was certainly something that was concerning to all. And again, it's just, when we let the wheels of justice play out, it always kind of works out in favor of the community.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Attorney at law Erica Wilson joining us live with analysis here on Atlanta News First Plus. And it's obviously a story that we're going to continue to follow. So thanks so much to everyone for joining us.
I feel like I was squinting because